Hi, how are you doing? What I want to do this evening is just to go through a few of the types of psychology, right? One of the first one that I'd like to look at is what we call biopsychology. What is biopsychology? Bio, you what runs into your mind when I said bio, right? Biology. Okay, fine. So what we do in biopsychology, what a biopsychologist does, is to study how biology influence behavior. So we look at hormones and so on, and in biopsychology, what happened is that we study a lot of the biology of the body of the individual, right? The eyes, the ears, and all those organs function to influence behavior. We study the neurons and neurotransmitters and hormones and so on. So the whole biology of the body, or that influence behavior, human behavior, right? So that's biopsychology, very critical aspect of psychology as we look at how the human body, the biology, the anatomy, right, and physiology of the body influence behavior, influence the psychology of the individual, right? So that's biopsychology, and we also have clinical psychology, right? This is a year of psychology that focuses on the diagnosis and the treatment of psychological disorders and other problematic patterns of behavior. So the clinical psychologist focuses on a number of pathological disorders that the individual may have, right? So they look at abnormalities, mental health, mental illnesses, those things that would have influenced, would have triggered what we call maladaptive behavior in individuals, right? So we also have what is called cognitive psychology. Cognitive psychology, right, is the aspect of psychology that looks at the thought process and their relationship to experience and actions. So it speaks of how we think, right, our thought process and how it influences our behavior. So we perhaps look at cognitive behavioral therapy, or in fact what we think influence how we act, right? So cognitive psychologists focus on that sort of relationship between the thought process and our actions or behavior. Counseling psychologists, counseling psychology and the counseling psychologists really um, focus on improving emotional, social, vocational, and other aspects of the individual's lives, right? And kind of allow the individual or drive the individual to live a psychologically healthy life, right? So it's really focused on our emotions, social, um, vocational, and another aspect of our lives that will help us to cope with the everyday stress of life, in our occupations and so on. But we can also look at industrial psychologists that speaks to the workplace, the industry, and how we we respond to the stimuli within organizations, industrial/organizational psychologists, right? And how we behave, we operate, we behave within organization, within the industry, within the workplace. That's industrial psychology, all right? Forensic psychology. So forensic, you speak of the courthouse, right? Crime. So forensic psychology is the area of psychology that applies the science of psychology and practice of psychology to issues, to challenges within and related to the justice system, to law. So it's a mixture of psychology and law, right? So you see these sort of psychologists in the courthouse from time to time. So humanism or humanistic psychology. most cases we call it positive psychology, right? That aspect of psychology that emphasizes the potential for good that is innate, is inborn in human. In human, we talk about um, persons like Rogers and Maslow, right? Before, so these are the side of psychologists. Personality psychology, the study of patterns of thoughts and behaviors that make each individual unique, right? So your personality. So that those psychologists focuses on your personality, the personality of the individual that makes that the individual unique and behave in a unique way. And personality is basically a consistent pattern of behavior that you have, right? Um, Something we look at when we look at personality psychology, right? So we have personality traits in those things, and it's really a consistent patterns of thoughts and behavior. And talk about that's not too long ago. That personality, um, that we talk about personality, right? So so these are this type of psychology that you see um, develop within the realm of psychology, right? But you have more learning psychologists, right? They actually speaks to the aspect of learning and apply psychology to the process of learning, you know, how you learn, right? And it's sort of like educational psychology, right? Because educational psychology and educational psychologists focus on the educational system, bringing psychology into the educational system, um, and how students behave within the educational system, within the classroom. So that is a critical psychology, again, right? That needs to be considered. Developmental psychologists basically study the individual lifespan, right, from zero to death. So they study the stage development of the individual from zero, from birth, or the individual is expected to be at a certain age in his or her development, through to death, right? So those psychologists actually study the individual. Those are developmental psychologists. Social psychology is that aspect of psychology that speaks to the individual behavior within a social setting, right? They look at friendships, they look at leadership, they look at riots, right? They look at things like groups or the individual operating that social setting, called group, right? The dynamics, right? So so those are social psychologists. Abnormal psychology focuses on the abnormalities of behavior, right? That psychology and psychologists will consider abnormalities such as schizophrenia, anxiety, social phobia, and other sort of phobia, right? And they will look at the abnormalities and the maladaptiveness or adaptiveness for that matter in behavior, right? So those psychologists are very, very critical, um, to look at. What do we leave out now in terms of type of psychology? Um, yeah, so we look at um, all of the psychology that we let me see that we should have looked at. Biopsychology, we look at individual difference psychology. This is a kind of thin line, between this and perhaps personality psychology. But individual differences psychology, their focus is on um, the fact that individuals are different, and therefore they study the differences of individuals, right? And how individuals will behave differently because of who they are, because they're individual, right? And personality psychology really taps into that, right? So So you'll find that happening. Sensation and perception basically speaks to how it looks at memory, right? It looks at how we respond with our senses to stimuli in the environment, and how we perceive these these stimuli. So perception and sensation is that aspect of psychology that looks at that, and that is important. Speaks to memory, short-term, long-term memory, sensory memory, right? And we will look at that. This is a very interesting aspect of psychology. Very, very interesting aspect of psychology, sensation and perception. It look at vision too. It dips into a number of biopsychological um, areas, right? So it will do that because biopsychology looks at human genetics. It looks at cells and, as I said, the nervous system and the neurons and so on, the brain and the spinal cord, and how those influence the endocrine system, how those influence behavior, right? But sensation and perception dabbles into that a bit because it looks at vision, and it also looks at it looks at vision really, and it also looks at, and it's all sorry about that, and it also look at waves and wavelengths. And it speaks to our senses in general, right? Um, as we say, learning psychology, it goes deep into what is learning and the classical conditioning, operant conditioning. We talk about Skinner and the Skinner box. It looks at observational learning, something we will look at. Um, Cognitive psychology speaks to intelligence and thinking, right? Languages, or we acquire language, and problem solving. It looks at the difference between intelligence and creativity. Measures of intelligence, the IQ, we know about that, and the sources of intelligence, right? It looks at that. Um, yeah, the developmental psychology is the same lifespan psychology, right? And it looks at lifespan theories, the Erickson theories and so on, stages of development and death and dying, and how we cope with that grievance process, right? So it does look at that. Um, yeah, and we talk about personality psychology. It looks at what personality is really. The Freud and psychodynamic perspectives. We talked about that before. Learning approach, humanistic approaches, biological approaches as it relates to personality traits theories, and cultural understanding of personality. Personality culture can influence personality a lot, and look at personality assessment, right? What I did not say to you is that social psychology and social psychologists also look at self-presentation, attitudes, and persuasion, and it's also look at what we call conformity, compliance, being compliant, and obedience, prejudice, and discrimination. It looks at aggression because as I said, it speaks to how you behave within social setting, and look at pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior simply means being good, being a good person. Take that old lady across the road. Be nice to that elderly man who wants a seat on the bus. Pro-social behavior. What makes you behave in a pro-social way? It, instead of being what we call antisocial in personality, right? And we look at that later on, right? We talked about industrial organizational psychology. It basically speaks to what is industrial organizational psychology. Industrial psychology selecting and evaluating employees, selecting and evaluating employees. So we look at those things, right? And we look at the social dimension of work. We also look at human factors of psychology within the workplace design, or the workplace design to to um, to ensure that our workers work efficiently and effectively. So psychologists, we talk about psychological goal, and it relates to controlling behavior. So this aspect of psychology, just like educational psychology, is very critical in this aspect of controlling behavior, because we'll change the environment of the workplace in order to effect efficiency and and effectiveness within the workplace, right? That is very critical in terms of the human factor of psychology and workplace design. Or we design workplace to get the best from the workers. That's an important responsibility of psychologists, industrial psychologists, organizational psychologists. Stress lifestyle and health psychology. Health psychologists, we look at stress as health as it relates to how people function, especially people who are sick of a particular illness, how they would behave, right? And how we can, again, control in behavior, um, um, adjust the environment to ensure appropriate behavior. Psychological disorder is a part of the abnormal psychology aspect of things. Look at psychological disorder, diagnosing and classifying psychological disorder, perspectives, and psychology and the psychological disorder. As I said before, under abnormal psychology, look at anxiety disorder, things like obsessive, compulsive, and related disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, yes, PTS, that is, and look at mood disorders, dissociative disorders, personality disorders, look at disorders in childhood. So we got a lot of that from abnormal psychology. So when you talk about psychology, right, you talk about different types of psychology, because there are different types of psychology. I'm an industrial psychologist. I'm also an educational psychologist. Uh, um, I'm also an organizational psychologist, right? And I'm a clinical psychologist. However, when I study psychology, right, I also studied a number of other psychology, right? But I focus on those psychology that I talked to you, that I mentioned not too long ago, right? But so you have different types of psychologists, different types of psychology, um, and these are the things that we'll focus on when we talk about psychology and talk about behavior in subsequent sessions, right? So I'm looking forward to see you listening, learning a lot about the types of psychology as we go through them step by step, and look at the some of the important concepts within those aspects of psychology. Next session, we should be looking at the first one. We'd like to talk about biopsychology, right? And how it influences behavior, right? How the hormones influence how we behave, and so on. Look at genes, genetic aspect of things, and we should understand why people behave the way they do if there's an hormone challenges. Um, and we look at definition of hormones as well, right? And see how best we can tie that in to our behaviors and the people around us, their behavior, right? And understand more what's going on. So those are the types of psychology that that you're going to be learning about. Subscribe, send your questions, and let us answer them before we go into sessions each time, right? So subscribe. Thank you very much, and tell your friends to subscribe. They can learn a bit too. Right, it's not only for students, but for persons who would like to learn about their spouse, co-workers, employers, employees, and other persons around them, just to find out why we, why people do the things they do. Thank you very much, and have a blessed evening. Bye bye.